Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was underneath the Dodge Travco when the first siren went off. One of those long, uneven wails that you only hear when something has gone wrong across town, and the dispatcher wants every cruiser rolling at once. It was a muggy afternoon in late August, the kind where the concrete behind the shop held heat like a stove, and the mosquitoes came up from the creek after lunch. The RV's underbody smelled like old oil and road salt, and I had a breaker bar wedged against a rusted exhaust clamp. The radio that I kept on a shelf near the compressor was tuned low to a country station out of Columbus. When the song cut off mid-chorus and the announcer came back sounding tight, I slid out from under the rig, wiped my hands and turned it up. Touched, repeat, Franklin County Emergency Management advising residents to remain indoors. Avoid hospitals and large public areas. This is a developing situation. If you need assistance, call. Another siren spooled up somewhere deeper in the city. The Travco sat in the bay like a faded whale, cream paint chalked and brown striping sunburned to nearly grey. It was a 1978 model, dinette floor plan C, the kind that looked like a rounded loaf with glass everywhere. The owner had told me it hadn't moved much in the last decade. He wanted me to change out belts and hoses, pull the fuel tank, replace the sending unit, and fix a handful of electrical gremlins before he took a weekend drive with his wife. I'd gotten as far as dropping the tank and installing a new rubber filler neck and vent hoses. The carburetor was off the big block and sitting on my bench in pieces. My shop phone buzzed. I checked the caller ID. Maya. I hit speaker. "What's up?" I said. "I think you need to turn on the police scanner," my sister said. Her voice was level but clipped, the way it went when she focused. She was a paramedic student with 2 clinical rotations left before certification. "It's not just a bad Friday. People are calling in about attacks at hospitals, rest areas, and a supermarket on Hamilton Road. They're saying it spreads by bites." "That rumor again?" I walked to the back shelf where the uneiden handheld sat in its cradle. I thumbed the volume and dialed through channels. The training frequency for medics was a mess of overlapping voices. I landed on police dispatch and listened. Units were reporting chaotic scenes at alleys, parking lots, and an urgent care clinic. Officers were being told to avoid close contact. There was talk of sudden fever, violent behavior, and people who kept moving after injuries that should have laid them down. A supervisor's voice cut in to order perimeters and crowd control. Another siren rolled by outside. Then another, deeper, like a fire engine. "Where are you?" I asked. "On my way to the college. They're calling paramedic students to assist at station houses. We're not responding, just helping triage if people show up." "Is Dad with you?" "No, he's stuck at the warehouse near Indianapolis. He called an hour ago, said traffic's getting weird and they've been told to hold. His boss told everyone to wait for instructions." I looked at the Travco. The floor plan in my head shifted. "I can have the RV running tonight," I said. "The engine's good, the brakes are good. I can rig the carb and run it on a manual choke. It won't be pretty, but it'll roll." "You think we should leave? Go get Dad." "If these reports are real and they're not contained by this evening, yes. Interstate 70 straight west. It's the fastest shot." I paused. "I'll load tools and fuel. Meet me at the shop." "I'm bringing a med bag, scissors, tourniquets, and a pulse oximeter," she said. "And I'll stop at the apartment for clothes and those canned beans you hate." "Copy. Keep your phone on." "I always do," she said, and hung up. I shut off the radio and got back under the Travco. The clamp finally gave after a minute of steady pull. I slid out, propped the car back on the manifold, and bolted it down. I ran fresh fuel line to a clear inline filter so I could watch what came through. The fuel tank was still out, but I had 2 5-gallon jerry cans of fresh gas in the corner. I set one on the front bumper and ran a temporary line from the can to the filter to the fuel pump. I blew the dust out of the distributor cap, pulled the plugs to check for fouling, and gapped the points. When I turned the key, the engine caught on the third crank and settled into a lumpy idle. It sounded like a ship from an old movie, wide and strong, slow to anger. I tuned the mixture by ear until it didn't threaten to stall at 700 revolutions per minute. Outside, the afternoon turned yellow at the edges with humidity. The police scanner voiced another alert. County-wide curfew beginning at 8 p.m. Stay home, avoid gatherings, avoid contact with violent individuals. The phrase unknown etiology repeated enough times that it stopped being technical and started sounding like a confession. Maya arrived at 4:15 p.m. in her hatchback with the rear seats down and plastic tubs stacked like bricks. She parked by the bay door and jumped out with her hair tied back and a no-nonsense expression that I recognized from every difficult thing we'd ever done together. She was 26, 4 inches shorter than me, strong in the forearms from lifting gurneys and carrying backpacks full of gear. "You weren't kidding," she said, staring at the Travco. "This thing smells like an old bowling alley. We need it because it's steel, it's big, and I can fix it with what I have." I gestured to the pile of supplies I'd gathered. Toolkits, breaker bars, oil, coolant, spare belts, hose clamps, duct tape, electrical tape, zip ties, a coil of 12-gauge wire, terminals, a crimper, and the welding gear I kept for exhaust and occasional frame patches. "You bring the medical bag?" She hoisted a red backpack onto the workbench. Basic life support, some airway tools, saline, gauze, nitrile gloves, shears, tourniquets, no controlled meds. I grabbed masks, and we should talk about bite management. If those reports are right. "I know," I said. "We keep distance. We aim for the head if we have to stop somebody who's trying to harm us, but we avoid confrontation." She nodded. Agreed. We loaded the Travco with care. The rear held a bed. We slid bins of food under it and secured them with straps. The small wardrobe got clothes, blankets, and a roll of contractor bags. In a cabinet, I stacked canned goods, beans, tuna, corn, soup, and a few jars of peanut butter. I found an old propane 2-burner stove in the shop storage, with a crate of green canisters that had somehow escaped inspection dates for years. I put those in the lower compartment next to a propane adapter hose. I grabbed a toolbox with a soldering iron, a multimeter, and heat shrink tubing. I added a hand crank flashlight, a headlamp, and extra batteries. Maya brought a box of N95 masks and hand sanitizer. I grabbed a crowbar, a tire iron, and a wooden baseball bat I kept in the office for the occasional stray dog. We debated firearms for a long minute. My .30, 30 lever action, and a 12-gauge that I inherited from our uncle were in the safe at home. We agreed they would help if used responsibly and lawfully, but we also agreed not to wave them around or talk about them to strangers. We planned to pick them up on the way out of town if the road stayed navigable. By 5 p.m, the Travco idled in the lot. I wired the CB radio into a fused circuit and mounted the microphone on a hook by the driver's seat. I tuned to channel 19 and heard trucker chatter dissolve into emergency calls, then into static. "Fuel?" Maya asked. "The tank is out. We're running on a jerry can for now." I tapped the clear inline filter. It was still clean. "We can stop at that small station on Main and pay cash if the pumps are still running." She checked her phone. "They just announced curfew again. Also, there's a bulletin from the state health department. They're calling it a novel pathogen. Fever, agitation, loss of inhibition, biting behavior. Secondary symptoms seem to include rapid oxygen demand and lack of reaction to pain. They're telling people not to approach if someone is aggressive, and if you're bitten, to seek immediate medical care." "Is there any guidance about how long it takes after a bite?" I asked. "Unclear. Some reports say hours, some say minutes, but there's so much noise right now." I drove the Travco out of the lot and onto the road as carefully as if it were a friend who had just learned to walk again. The big steering wheel felt heavy but direct. The brakes pulled a little to the left, and the spare tire thumped once against the cabinet shoulder as we took the first bend. The sky had that strange dimness of a humid evening. the air just starting to cool. On Main Street, the small gas station was open with a line of cars and people standing with containers. I pulled into a side lane and idled. The clerk had propped the door open and was working with a handheld credit reader. A city cruiser sat at the curb with its light bar on steady burn. The officer inside had his windows up and his eyes forward. We waited 15 minutes. I paid for 30 gallons and the clerk let me pump it into the Travco's tank, which I had bolted back into place just enough to accept fuel without dragging on the road. I poured in a bottle of fuel stabilizer and a splash of heat to chase moisture. I filled 2 spare cans. People were polite in the way people are polite when they're pretending things are fine. A woman with a toddler in her arms asked if we were heading west. I said yes and told her to be careful. She asked if schools would be closed tomorrow. I had no answer. She nodded as if I had said something profound, then turned and buckled her child into a booster seat. The toddler waved at us with an ice cream sticky hand. We left town at 5:45 p.m. I turned onto Interstate 70 westbound and set the Travco at 55 miles per hour. The noise inside was a conversation between engine and wind. Maya sat in the passenger seat with the med bag under her feet and a notebook on her lap. She had her phone tuned to scanner apps and emergency alerts. I watched the mirrors. 10 miles out, traffic began to clot. A few cars pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Hoods pointed toward the ditch. A box truck sat sideways in the right lane, with its rear door sprung open. We eased around it by climbing the left shoulder, the Travco's tyres rolling over the dotted line, brink by brink. In the interchange ahead, a highway sign flashed, "Avoid hospitals, seek shelter at home." A mile further, an electronic billboard said, "Curfew 8 p.m, stay in place." At 6:30 p.m, we crossed a county line. The fields widened, and the air smelled like cut hay. Maya called our father, and for once he picked up on the first ring. "I'm at the distribution center," he said. He sounded winded but steady. "They closed the gates. A lot of drivers left though. The highway is a mess." "We're coming," Maya said. "Stay on the phone as long as you can." "I'm fine. I found a crate of bottled water. I'm not going anywhere without you two." "You always say that," I said. He snorted. "Because it's true. Don't rush. Watch intersections. If anyone gets too close to the vehicle, drive away. Don't argue. And don't stop for people who are acting strange." "We know," Maya said. "We'll be there after dark. We'll call when we're close." "Good," he said. "I'm at the northwest gate by the service road. It's the one with the busted chain link. You'll see my yellow hat." We drove through sunset with the Travco's headlights on low beam and the dash lights dim. I watched the temperature gauge sit at a hair above middle. The oil pressure held steady. The sky went through its last light and became a matte, featureless night, damp and thicker than it had been at noon. We passed 2 rest areas that looked full. The first had trucks parked nose out. The second had cars on the grass and people standing near picnic tables, holding their phones up as if the moon could charge them. By 8 p.m, we approached a Flying J Travel Plaza not far from Richmond. The one I always liked because its service bay had a manager who actually cared about torque specs. The lot looked different now. A dozen pickup trucks and a few semis had formed a semicircle near the diner entrance, with pallets, plastic crates, and cargo straps forming a makeshift barrier. The lights were on inside the diner. A group of people stood outside near a folding table, piled with bottled water and crackers. A generator coughed somewhere behind the building. "Should we stop?" Maya asked. "We need information," I said. "We'll keep the engine running and the doors locked until we assess." A man with a high visibility vest and a white beard, late 50s by the look of him, waved us into a spot near the barrier. He didn't come close. He stopped 10 feet from the driver's window. I rolled it down 2 inches. "You folks doing okay?" he asked. His voice had the long vowel drawl of trucking radio. "You headed west?" "Yes," I said. "We're going to Indianapolis to pick up our father." "I'm Rick," he said. "Retired out of Tulsa. Used to haul reefers and auto parts. We set up here 2 hours ago when the radio went sideways. We got water and a full tank for the generator. We're telling people to keep lights low after dark. Sound draws them. The infected, Maya said. He nodded. I'm not using the other words, but yes, they can hear an engine from a long way off when it's quiet. They don't seem to move much during the day when it's hot, but they come out near dusk. You can get by them if you don't make noise and don't let them see you move. Any law enforcement presence? I asked. A patrol car came by at sunset. The officer told us to avoid hospitals and large gatherings, and to leave if anyone starts acting violent. He scratched his beard. You two look like you have a plan. If you want to park in the inner semicircle, we've got a safer overnight. No one moves after 9 p.m. and we keep a low profile. But you might be better off pushing to your destination if you're confident behind the wheel. I'm comfortable driving, I said. But I don't like the idea of running into something I can't see on an unlit stretch. The road west looks mostly clear this hour, he said. There's a tangle at mile marker 147 with a couple of trailers across the lanes. You can skirt it on the right shoulder if you're wide awake and take it slow. If you want to join us, we can use another set of hands. We're taking turns watching, and we're boarding up the diner windows with cargo pallets. Maya looked at me. I could see she was reading the situation. Basic organization, calm leadership, a clear curfew, and attention to practical details. She nodded. We'll stay until, say, 4:30 a.m., I said. Then we go. 4:30 a.m. is good, Rick said. Horizon will be showing just enough by then, and it will still be quiet. We parked the Travco with its tail against the pallets and its nose toward the fuel pumps. We kept the engine running long enough to top off our tank. The others had put traffic cones around the far pump to keep vehicles from swinging in too quickly. We shut down the engine and the lights and sat inside to listen. The air conditioning ticked as it cooled. The interior went dark except for the small light over the stove. Maya made a quick inventory of our supplies, while I checked the door latches and installed a simple crossbar on the inside of the main door using a length of angle iron and 2 through-bolted brackets I had in a box. It would not stop a determined assault, but it would make it loud. Around 9:15 p.m., just after a hurried meal of tuna with crackers, a sound rose up from the far side of the lot. It started as a few voices and then became something else. A collective noise, not words exactly, more like many people clearing their throats at once. The air brightened. I turned off the stove light. We remained still and listened. Something shuffled against the outer row of cars not far from us, then moved away. Rick's group kept every light off except for one red-shaded lamp at the barrier. At 10 p.m, a woman eased into the Travco's bench opposite us with a steaming mug. She was mid-30s, short hair, steady hands. I'm Tess, she said softly. National Guard Communications Tech. I was on leave visiting my aunt in Columbus when everything jumped. Rick asked me to coordinate the CB and the handhelds. Your name came up as a mechanic. Eli, I said. This is my sister Maya. Good to meet you both, she said. We're going to try to reinforce the diner windows at first light. If you've got tools, we can make more progress before you head out. Happy to help, I said. What do you know from guard channels? Mixed reports. Some units mobilized, some never formed. There was a line across a bridge in Kansas City at sunset. They were telling traffic to hold east of it. No idea what it looks like now. West beyond that, radio thins out. We need to get to Indianapolis to pick up our father, Maya said. Then we might head toward Kansas. We're thinking Colorado Springs after that, if there's anything organized that way. I heard mention of an airfield west of there trying to coordinate with a state task force, Tess said, but nothing confirmed. Be careful in Kansas City. Bridges concentrate everything. We talked until 11 p.m. in low voices, sharing only what needed to be shared. Tess returned to the barrier, and Maya and I lay down fully clothed on the Travco's bed. Boots off, but ready. I set an alarm for 4:15 a.m. and dozed with my hand on the baseball bat. The RV ticked and breathed around us. The strange collective noise outside rose and fell, never quite leaving. At 4:15 a.m. the alarm chirped. We dressed, drank water, and met Rick and Tess by pallets. Dawn was a thin grey line. The parking lot had changed. A few cars now had scuff marks and handprints on their windows. Rick pointed out a spot where something had pushed against the barrier in the night. He had placed a single traffic cone there as a reminder to double the straps. We worked fast to bolt pallets into simple braces against the diner windows, using deck screws and a handful of steel angles from a trailer repair kit. I used the Travco's inverter to run my impact driver for short bursts so the noise didn't carry. The group moved efficiently. A trucker from Kentucky had a clipboard with tasks and a neat hand. By 4:50 a.m. we had to go. Rick walked us to the Travco, while the others finished tying in one last brace. Interstate westbound is open for now, he said. If you run into that tangle at mile 147, take it slow along the shoulder. Keep the engine quiet when you can. Be careful near Indianapolis. Reports say hospital lots are full, and angry people are throwing things when they get close to the doors. Don't stop to argue. I shook his hand through the window. You coming with us? I asked, half joking, half hoping. He looked at the line of trucks. I might catch you down the road, he said. I've got to make sure this group is steady first. But if you see a white Peterbilt with a blue stripe and a ridiculous chrome visor, that's me, or it was once. Good luck. We rolled out. The sky edged lighter, but clouds kept it flat. The Travco took the on-ramp with a heavy, steady ride. I held 50 miles per hour and listened to the engine, which sounded honest and slightly musical in the way old V8s do when they're doing their job. Maya tuned the scanner. Tess's voice came through once with a quick farewell and a fragment of weather, humidity rising. Storms building over Missouri. We made Indianapolis by 7:15 a.m. The distribution center sat near the interstate, a collection of low buildings and amazed loading docks. The northwest gate was open just enough to admit a person. Someone had cut one section of chain link and then folded it back. A yellow hat bobbed near a utility pole. Dad, Maya said, pointing. I slowed, rolled the Travco to the shoulder, and stopped. Our father climbed in fast, shutting the door without slamming it. He wore his warehouse badge and his usual plaid shirt. He had a small duffel and a case of water. He hugged Maya and then me. He looked tired but clear. You two did good, he said. Traffic lights are mostly blinking red. People inch forward because they don't want to get too close to anybody. I saw 3 ambulances try to turn into a hospital, and a crowd kept them from entering the lot. We're going west, I said. Are you okay with that? I'm okay with anything that moves away from cities, he said. We should refuel before we leave the area, and we should think about making the RV harder to break into. I saw a group last night who looked at parked cars like they were stores without cashiers. There's an industrial strip 2 miles back, I said. Welding supply, plastics, metal siding. If we go now, we can grab scrap and build windows. We took a service road to an industrial corner lot where a sheet metal shop's side door stood open. No one was in the office. Inside the shop, a forklift sat with its forks up. I left cash on the counter with a note that said, emergency purchase, sheet steel and hardware, thank you, and we loaded the Travco with what we needed. 2 sheets of 18-gauge galvanized steel, a roll of welded wire mesh, a stack of polycarbonate panels cut for window replacements, a box of pop rivets, a manual rivet gun, a handful of angle iron, and a bucket of self-drilling screws with hex heads. We grabbed 2 pairs of leather gloves, a face shield, and a bag of step drill bits. In the parking lot, I measured the Travco's windows and cut panels to fit over the lower halves, leaving a slit at eye level for view and ventilation. I backed the panels with polycarbonate where clear views still mattered, the front windows, and the passenger side, so the mirrors would be useful. We overlaid welded mesh inside the window frames, secured with cut lengths of angle iron and bolts so prying would be loud and slow. For the main door, I added a second interior crossbar and reinforced the hinge bolts. The emergency exit at the rear got a latching brace that could be dropped in seconds if we had to go. The roof vents got mesh guards. Maya and Dad handled fasteners and held panels while I drilled. No one complained. I sweated enough to soak my shirt. We finished around 10:30 a.m. The Travco looked like a cross between a field ambulance and a bank truck. The mesh and polycarbonate interfered a bit with the view, but I could still see the mirrors and I had the periphery I needed. We swept our metal shavings into a bucket and left it near a drain. I took a last look at the note I'd left and added more cash. Then we rolled. Interstate 70, west of Indianapolis, looked open for 50 miles. We passed farms, small towns with flags hanging limp in the heat, and a burned-out car at an exit ramp that looked like it had been pushed aside with a state plow. At 12:15 p.m., we found a truck stop that still had power and a few human beings moving with purpose. We fueled fully, topped the coolant and checked tire pressures while Maya refilled our water cans and bought coffee. Dad walked a perimeter around the RV, eyes scanning like he had done during our childhood camping trips. He noted a rattle in one of the rear hubcaps and a missing fastener on the spare tire bracket. He fixed both, with the calm of experience. By mid-afternoon, the heat settled like a blanket. I set the Travco's speed to 52 miles per hour to save fuel. We stopped only once more to use a rest area where a volunteer with a reflective vest handed out small bottles of water and a sheet of paper with printed guidance. Stay with your vehicle, keep windows closed, do not approach others, do not go to hospitals unless absolutely necessary. Call for help if you experience fever or confusion. The volunteer looked tired and held himself like a person who had not sat down all day. I said thank you. He nodded, asked us to move on, and turned to the next car. The first real barrier appeared in eastern Missouri, where a semi-truck had jackknifed across both lanes, and two more trailers had crumpled behind it. The cab's doors were open. The trailer's rear swing doors hung by one hinge. We stopped 100 yards short and scanned. The shoulder looked passable, but only just. The ditch sloped, and a signpost leaned into the way. "We can clear it," I said, "but we need to be quick. We don't want to be here at dusk." We donned gloves and moved quietly. Maya kept watch with Dad, while I used a hacksaw to take the signpost down at the base, then dragged it aside. We removed a section of guardrail weakened by a previous impact by undoing the bolts at a post and prying the rail outward just enough to give the Travco a straight line along the far shoulder without scraping its side. The air smelled like brake pads and hot rubber. We worked with care and speed. Inside the lead trailer, supplies lay scattered, shrink-wrapped cases of canned meals, tarps, and bottled water. The labels read, "Emergency Relief." We didn't take much. 2 cases of vegetables and a small box of electrolyte packets. Maya found a first aid kit and a bag of surgical masks. In the second trailer, we heard a sound, low and irregular, coming from behind a stack of pallets. We froze. I held up a hand, then stepped forward slowly, with the tire iron raised to shoulder height. Behind the pallets, a man lay on his side with his leg pinned under a shifted skid. He looked at us with a settling calm, like a person who had made peace with something. He had a cut on his arm that had bled, then stopped. The air near him smelled like old copper. "Can you talk?" I asked. He licked his lips. "Don't move me," he said. "I can't feel my foot. If you lift this, I'll scream, and I think screaming brings them." "We can make a splint," Maya said. She knelt and spoke to him in her professional tone. "What's your name?" "Mark," he said. "I'm Maya. This is Eli and our father. We're leaving soon. We can leave water right by you and put out a flare if you want someone to find you. But it might be safer if you're quiet." Mark nodded once and swallowed. "Leave the water," he said. "No flare." Maya put 2 bottles near his hand and a pack of crackers. She told him how to keep calm and breathe slow. She told him we were sorry. He closed his eyes. We backed out and left the remaining supplies untouched. The moral tension sat with me like a weight, but we did not stay to justify it to ourselves. Survival sometimes demands you pass on choices you can't make without putting others in danger. We had a father in our RV and a plan. On the shoulder, we guided the Travco through the gap we had made. It cleared the scraped guardrail by inches. We left the crinkled metal in better shape than we'd found it, bolting the loose section back to the post so the next vehicle could assess. As we pulled away, I checked the mirrors. Nothing moved behind us but heat. That evening we ran dark. The Travco's cabin lights stayed off. Only the instrument panel glowed faintly. I taped a small square of black plastic over the back of the radio so no reflected LED would show. We ate cold beans and bread and didn't talk much because the road had a new sound. It started around sunset, a background hush that wasn't just wind. In the reflection of other vehicles' windows, I saw silhouettes. Heads turning in a way that didn't match conversation. The infected showed up in small groups, walking along shoulders or down the center of lanes that had been abandoned. They didn't run. They moved with single focus toward engines, then spread out when the engines receded. That was the pattern through twilight. Noise attracted, silence released. West of Columbia, we cut the engine and coasted down long grades. We used emergency flashers only when essential. At a rest area, we stopped for 10 minutes, shut the engine off, and listened. The quiet was heavy. Somewhere near the tree line, a branch snapped. I asked Maya to hand me the 12 gauge we had retrieved from home on the way through the city. I checked it, made sure it was unloaded, and then loaded it with a pair of shells. I set it aside within reach. We didn't want to use it. We wanted to be somewhere else. On the second night, we approached the suspension bridge into Kansas City. The road signs had darkened. We passed 2 abandoned Humvees with sandbags piled around them like an unmanned checkpoint. Faded signs read, CDC, keep distance, slow. The river below looked like polished stone in the moonlight. The bridge deck rose and flattened. The wind shifted across it in a steady, low push. A barricade of concrete blocks sat 50 yards ahead, with a gap narrow enough to make me slow to a crawl. Then the generator in the back of the Travco coughed. We had strapped it in for emergencies, a small portable unit that put out enough current to run power tools or a light if we needed to change a tire at night. I had closed the fuel valve, but somewhere in the shifting, the choke lever had slid half open and it had popped once, loud enough to carry. We heard answering movement from farther down the bridge, a shuffling sound, then a quick beat of footfalls. Get ready, Dad said calmly. Lights off, keep moving at a steady pace. Shapes appeared ahead in the headlights, then were lost again when we cut the lights to slits. We could not reverse. Cars behind us boxed us in. I rolled forward at 3 miles per hour, fingers light on the wheel. The first figure reached the barricade gap and turned toward us, arms up. It moved faster when it realized we were there. Another came into view, then another. There was no chatter, no demands, no commands, only focus. Eli, Maya said, voice even. Aim the bumper, don't stop. I won't, I said. We slid through the gap. A figure thumped against the mesh-reinforced passenger window. The sound was a dull drum. Another hand slapped the polycarbonate over the driver's side skylight. I kept the wheel straight and resisted the urge to floor it because spinning tires would give them noise. We bumped twice over something I didn't want to think about, then cleared the second barricade. More silhouettes moved along the walkway, called by the generator's bark and the engine's low growl. The bridge felt longer than it had when we started. I kept going. Propane, Dad said. If we have to discourage a crowd, we can use a soundless flame burst. I understood. We had brought 2 20-pound propane cylinders with a torch head and a length of hose. He moved to the back, opened a side hatch, and turned a valve. The smell of faint mercaptan leaked in like memory. Through the rear window, he aimed the torch into open air, away from the vehicle and the bridge surface, and thumbed the striker. A shush of flame rolled out in a controlled cone. The light was bright, but soundless, except for the hiss. Silhouettes flinched from it, but didn't scatter dramatically because they didn't process fear like that. They moved toward what they could hear. Light alone did not draw them. The generator coughed again. I reached back, grabbed the choke lever using the long-handled pliers I had set within reach for just such a mistake, and pushed it home. The engine steadied into silence more suited to carrying a vehicle through a room full of sleeping strangers. We gained 20 yards, then 30. That was when Rick appeared in our headlights, on foot, at the edge of the barrier, holding a road flare above his head like a beacon. He had a long coat, his white beard, and the same calm face as before. He had come from somewhere to the side, and he was already moving briskly toward a square metal cylinder set behind a stack of sandbags. Maya said his name at the same time I did. He looked at us, met my eyes through the slitted light, and shook his head slightly. He pointed with his free hand toward the western exit of the bridge. "Move," the gesture said. "Do not stop for me." Behind him, a herd of infected filtered around a disabled bus. They were not slow. They weren't sprinting, but they were closing distance at a speed that made time thin. Rick reached the cylinder. One of those standalone propane tanks you sometimes see near construction sites to run temporary heaters. He snapped a valve with a wrench in his left hand. He tossed the flare into a pan at the base that must have had some accelerant in it. Flame rolled silently, then lifted. "Go," Dad said. I went. The Travco surged, then steadied as I pulled the throttle back to avoid spinning. In the mirrors, I saw Rick look back once. The propane pan burned in a controlled, tall roar. He stepped away. When the infected nearest the flame moved within a yard of it, a secondary line caught, and the flame broadened, throwing bright light that turned the whole middle span into sharp relief. Shadows danced across the metal trusses. We cleared the last set of concrete blocks and made the far side of the bridge. The herd's focus broke a little in the sudden light. Some turned toward the flame, not because it was light, but because it made a faint, low whistle. The propane setup roared, then popped. The air compressed. The sound of the bridge changed. Metal groaned, bolts complained. A section of the barrier gave way. We kept going until we were beyond the next span, and then beyond the next, and then the road bent in a way that said the river was behind us. We pulled off at a service road to breathe. My hands shook for the first time since we started. Maya swallowed hard and stared through the windshield with a fixed focus that I recognized from the worst nights at the shop when a stubborn job had to be done right. Dad sat down and put one hand on his knee and the other on the bench. No one cried. No one said anything dramatic, because there was no space for that and no need. We had moved forward. We owed a stranger more than a sentence. We pushed west. Through Kansas, the land stretched. The highway felt like a ribbon laid across a table. The infected appeared less frequently, or maybe they were there, and we just didn't see them, because there was room to go around. I kept the speed steady to save fuel. We learned to cut the engine on long descents and coast in neutral while keeping full control. Then restart quietly at the bottom when we needed power. We learned to stop before we were tired, not after. We learned to eat on a schedule rather than when stress told us to, because hunger made mistakes. Fuel became the limiting factor by the second afternoon. Gas stations weren't running, or their pumps were locked. We began siphoning from abandoned vehicles. I had a hand pump with a clear hose. We checked tanks by tapping the side with a knuckle and listening for fullness. We avoided vehicles that smelled wrong or had dents near the filler neck. We favoured pickups owned by people who looked like they maintained their tools. Maya mixed stabilizer into every container we poured into the Travco's tank. She labelled the cans with a piece of tape and a time to track degradation. We watched the filter's clarity every time the engine ran. I changed the filter once by the side of the road with one knuckle smashed and a strip of skin peeled from the back of my hand. It was nothing. We wrapped it and kept going. When we found an abandoned way station with a service tunnel under the road, we took it as a gift. The entrance sat half concealed behind a maintenance gate and a line of scrub trees. The tunnel had fluorescent lights that flickered under backup power and a sound that said the ventilation fans were running on the last of some emergency circuit. Inside, the concrete was clean and the air was cooler. There was a small office with a logbook on the desk and a map of county roads pinned to the wall. The map had circles drawn in highlighter around certain bridges and small towns. I didn't ask myself too hard why someone had marked them. I was grateful to know they existed. We rolled the Travco into the tunnel, set it against a wall, and shut it down. We ate quietly. Maya cleaned her instruments and checked our water. Dad found an old radio on a shelf and put new batteries in it. He turned the dial until a voice came through. faint, wobbly, but real. Repeat, if you hear this, avoid large urban centers. Some National Guard units operating out of smaller airfields are coordinating supply drops and medical checks. If you're near Colorado Springs, there are rumors of a survivor camp with a radio mast on a hill. Unconfirmed. Seek high ground. Conserve resources. Help others only when safe. We sat with that for a moment. The tunnel hummed. The world above us kept its own schedule. I folded the map and placed it under a magnet on the fridge door, like people do when they move into a rental and make it feel like theirs. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I walked 20 yards down the tunnel and looked at the Travco from the side. It had begun the week as a restoration project and was now a tool. We had layered it with mesh and polycarbonate and steel. Inside were our supplies, our father, and our plan. Outside was a world that still had highways and stars and towns with names that meant something. I thought about Mark in the trailer and about Rick on the bridge. I thought about the woman with the toddler asking me about school. I thought about the volunteer handing out bottles of water until his arms shook. None of it fit a single story. It was all detail. In the morning, we drained a quart of condensation from the fuel-water separator and changed the oil. The engine sounded better after that, less worn, less tired. We took a careful stock of food. We had enough for a week if rationed. We decided to go to Colorado Springs. It offered a shape to the horizon that wasn't just a road. We folded the polycarbonate edge where it had started to crack near a screw and added a washer. We tied the propane cylinders with 2 straps instead of 1. Maya wrote a list of symptoms to watch for on a piece of duct tape and stuck it to the inside of the door. Fever, confusion, aggressive behavior, lack of response to injury, not recognizing family, inability to follow a simple command. It was harsh, but it was the right thing to have as a reference when stress could make you rationalize what you didn't want to see. We all read it out loud and signed our initials next to it like an agreement. By afternoon, we were back on the interstate. The air cooled a little, clouds massed to our north but didn't threaten us yet. The Travco wandered a little with crosswinds, but held the lane well. We checked mirrors every 30 seconds and the gauges every minute. We spoke in short sentences. We waved at other drivers when it seemed safe, not for camaraderie, but to show we were awake and level. Near the Colorado line, the road rose in a way that made everything feel closer. On the right, pastures sloped up to low ridges. We saw fewer infected on the shoulder and more animals, the kind that had figured out quickly that cars move differently now. We stopped for 10 minutes at a turnout and listened to the radio. The same faint voice came through again, a different recording this time. It mentioned a small airport west of Colorado Springs with a call sign that I recognized from a road trip years ago. It mentioned a water truck schedule and a system of colored flags for medical triage. It mentioned a warning to approach slowly and to show both hands out the window when near the gate. We rolled again. The sun was behind us now, low enough to make long shadows in front of the Travco. The bridge across a dry wash rattled the cupboards. 2 cars passed us going east, their windows up and faces forward. A small figure waved from the back seat of one. Maya waved back without thinking. At 6:40 p.m, the radio cracked with the clearest thing we'd heard in days. A woman's voice saying, "Survivor camp west of the city. If you can hear this, proceed to the Junction 8 turnoff and follow the signs with the triangle symbol. Keep engines quiet if possible. Do not stop on the bridge. If you are feeling sick, turn your hazard lights on now and move to the right shoulder for medical assessment." We looked at each other. The Travco's engine hummed steady at 2,400 revolutions per minute. The fuel gauge sat just below half. The temperature was steady. The oil pressure was good. The plan was simple, like the first hours had been. We would stick to the interstate, avoid cities, and camp at truck stops when needed. We had done that as best we could. Now we had directions. I tightened my grip on the wheel, not because I was afraid, but because the muscles demanded something to do with the extra energy. "We follow the signs," I said. "Slow and quiet," Dad said. "We don't get close to anyone unless they ask us to. Maya said. And we keep distance until they are screened. We hold to the list. She tapped the tape with the symptoms. I nodded and eased the Travco into the right lane. The sun found a gap in the clouds and laid a strip of bright across the windshield. The highway rolled on, a straight line drawn across a big open place. People used to say the interstate meant you could go anywhere if you had fuel and a map. Maybe that was still true in a smaller way. The kind of anywhere that is more about a gate with a triangle sign and a water truck schedule than about a beach or a national park. As the road took us towards the turnoff, the CB clicked once and carried a signal that kept braking, then steadying, like a distant friend walking towards you with a message you couldn't quite hear yet. We followed the signs. We moved with the care of people who had learned that noise and light attract the wrong kind of company. We held to our agreements and to each other. We kept our tools close and our tempers even. And when the triangle sign finally showed at the side of the road with an arrow pointing right and a line of cones guiding us down an exit, I felt the kind of relief that does not show up in movies because it is quiet and practical. We checked the mirrors one more time, and then I put the turn signal on and let the Travco roll into the lane that would carry us toward people with a plan. The interstate used to mean freedom. Now it's just a straight line through the end of the world. And if you hold that line, if you think and work and move for the people in your vehicle, sometimes that's enough to reach the next place where things make sense. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.